Sometimes it feels like the walls are breathing. They are built of stone, lacquer, and silence. But in the morning haze, when the guards are still yawning and the eunuchs are changing shifts, I can hear them sigh, as if they too are tired of keeping the emperor's secrets. My name is Jiangshun. I've been a eunuch at the court for 7 years. I wear clothes without buttons, shoes without heels, and a voice without the right to speak loudly. I am invisible at the heart of the most powerful empire on earth. I saw the completion of the new palace. They called it the Forbidden City. I heard the imperial concubines whisper beneath their fans. I walked officials to their execution in the morning, though the night before they had been drinking tea with the Minister of Rights. I have stories to tell about the scent of lacquer, blood, and incense, about what it means to be no one in a place where every step sounds like a command. But for now, if you're still awake, write in the comments what city you're from. And don't forget to subscribe. Tomorrow, I'll share another forgotten story. I wasn't born a eunuch. No one is born a eunuch. It's not a title, not a gift, not a choice. It's a knife. I was 10, maybe 11. No one recorded the exact date. In our village in the south, far from Beijing, where rice grows even in puddles, we lived close together, but quietly. My father was poor, but not foolish. He knew I had little chance of survival. The land wasn't enough. For peasants, work was a bone without meat. But if a boy became a eunuch, the family would receive silver, maybe even have their rice taxes forgiven. I remember that day. It rained relentless, like a tax collector. They took me to a house that smelled of damp stone and herbs. The old doctor said nothing. He only looked. I didn't understand what was going to happen. Only my mother did. She turned away. The procedure was quick. Not clean, just quick. They held me down like a goat before sacrifice. I screamed, and it felt like the whole world screamed with me. Then darkness. Then fever. Then a week, maybe 2. I don't remember. My body was no longer mine, and my name was written into a scroll. Now I was a eunuch. I didn't go to the palace right away. First came the school for eunuchs. Yes, such a place exists. It's in Jiangshun. There they taught us to bow and be silent, to write neatly, to speak softly, to stand for hours without moving. Being a eunuch isn't just mutilation. It's a profession. We are servants, secretaries, archivists, advisors, cooks, overseers, even spies. But above all, we are shadows. We must be everywhere and nowhere. At school, we were taught not to ask questions, but we whispered anyway. Some said, if you live past the 3rd year, you get used to it. Others, all eunuchs lose their memories of childhood. I tried to remember anything, the crust on bread, the fabric of my father's shirt, my mother's voice. But over time, those memories faded like old ink on wet paper. When I turned 15, an order came. 20 of the best students would be sent to Beijing. The new palace was almost finished. They needed those who could hold their tongues and hold a brush without shaking. I made the list. They gave me a new name, Jiangshun, obedient and calm. I didn't know what awaited me, but I could feel it. The path I was walking would never end. It would wind through pillars, beneath carved eaves, across mosaic stones, until one day I would become so invisible I'd forget whether I had ever been a boy. But for now, I was going to Beijing. We arrived at dawn. The carts creaked, and the city was still asleep. The air was cold but clean. Locals called it the Emperor's breath. Before us, the walls towered warm red, smooth like blood on silk. The Forbidden City wasn't officially open yet, but eunuchs and concubines were already moving into the inner courts. They lined us up. The chief eunuch didn't look anyone in the eyes. He called names. nodded, and we entered. The moment I crossed the threshold, I felt the noise of the streets fall behind me. Everything here was quieter. The stones muffled footsteps. The wind didn't whistle, it whispered. Even the birds, it seemed, sang in half-voice. I still carry all of it with me. And if you had been there, you would understand. You'd understand how someone can forget their own name, but forever remember the scent of lacquer and the morning dust on the mosaic floor. There is no morning and no evening only ritual. You do not wake when you wish, but when it is prescribed. You do not eat because you are hungry, but because the schedule demands it. Even your thoughts must follow a timetable, so you're not tempted to say them aloud. My first year in the Forbidden City was a year of disappearing. I vanished slowly, layer by layer like old lacquer peeling off a screen. First, my voice disappeared. I wasn't allowed to speak first. Only when ordered, only briefly, only within the bounds of formal titles. I learned to speak from within through my eyes, a tilt of the head, the motion of a wrist. One glance might mean he is displeased. A quiet cough might mean tonight's dumplings come with fish roe. The palace speaks in hints, and if you fail to understand them, you're a corpse, just one still warm. Then my habits vanished. I no longer scratched my neck, blinked too often, or touched my face. Those were breaches of etiquette. I stood for hours, unmoving, a book in hand, reading imperial prose even the emperor didn't care for. I ate in silence, bowed in silence, even thought in silence. My room, if you could call that empty space behind a screen, a room was just wider than a coffin. There was a mat, a wooden pillow, and a shelf with 3 items: a robe, a cup, and a tablet with the rules. At night, in the silence, I could hear the senior eunuchs mumbling names in their sleep long forgotten, perhaps stolen, perhaps their own from before. Sometimes I asked myself, if I hadn't become a eunuch, who would I have been? But in the palace, that question is like a cry in a well. It echoes, but reaches no one. By day, I studied writing, not just writing court calligraphy. Every document in the palace was written with a brush, ink, and special paper made from mulberry bark. One wrong stroke, and you had insulted the emperor. I copied Tang poetry, astronomical reports, salt tax ledgers, letters from officials who had already been executed. Every blot of ink could become a death sentence. The head eunuch, Li Beizhong, was merciless. He had no eyebrows shaved in a vow of loyalty, and no smile. He walked silently, always from behind. If your hand shook while writing, tap a quick hit to the neck with a thin rod. Not hard, not cruel, but enough to remind you, mistakes are not allowed. He once said to us, "You are not a person. You are an extension of the order." I began to understand, within these walls, you cannot be yourself. You cannot love. You cannot long for anything. You cannot laugh. You cannot pity. You can only perform. You are a cog, a finger, but not the hand, a wall, but not the heart. As winter approached, I began to see things I don't think were real. A boy in a green robe walking through pillars. A girl with a red ribbon, singing with no sound. Dust floating, forming characters in the air. Maybe it was a dream. Maybe sleep deprivation. Or maybe the palace itself was affecting my mind. The Forbidden City is not just a place. It's a creature. It breathes. It knows where you are. It senses your weaknesses. And if you don't learn to be empty, it will fill you with itself. After a year, I no longer remembered the village. I no longer remembered my mother. I knew only the schedule. I was like water in a vessel taking the shape of whatever I was poured into. I became a shadow. And for the first time I noticed others beginning to ask for my opinion. You don't open your eyes, you bow your mind. I wake before the light, not by choice, by sound. Over there beyond the third wall, Where the kitchens are comes the first splash of water. The cooks begin to boil tea for the concubines. It's like a gong strikes soft, but inevitable. Then a clicking rhythm wooden shoes. The laundresses are carrying linen. They walk in silence, heads bowed, but from the way their steps fall, I know. Today the weather is clear. They're hurrying. I rise. The mat is hard. My back aches, but complaints are forbidden. The water in the basin is cold, bitingly so. Washing is done without splashing, without sighing. Only motion. As if I'm not washing my face, but putting on a mask. As I pull on my robe clay-colored, with long sleeves, I hear the first gates opening in the courtyard. Those are the gates of eastern light, leading to the concubines' quarters. Movement has begun there too. Servants are sprinkling incense water on the stone floors to erase the scent of sweat and fear. I head toward my post, the court of inner archives. But the path is never direct. Nothing in the palace is. Everything is angles. Everything is ritual. We, the eunuchs of the morning round, move by schedule and by corners. First, the southern gate. There stands the chief sentry, who must approve our route. He doesn't speak, just lifts a wooden plaque, marked with a red character. Permitted. Then, the dragon fountain, where we make a short bow not to water, but to memory. The ritual dates back to Hong Wu, first emperor of the Ming. Water flows downward, like a decree, from throne to servant. Only then do we enter the inner halls. There, in the hush, sixth-rank officials are already waiting, scrolls in hand. Fatigue in their eyes. Some have been here since midnight. A few try to doze against a pillar. But the moment the imperial archivist appears, they straighten like silk pulled from a chest. My task is to arrive unnoticed, with a tray of documents bearing the seal. Not a single scroll must be upside down. Not a single brush must touch paper, only wooden sticks may be used. I once heard a single drop of sweat on the Treasury Minister's report, and 5 people were executed. I don't want to be the 6th. When the sun reaches the roof of the Hall of Supreme Harmony, the main event begins, the Emperor's morning salutation. We call it the Rising with Shadow. I do not see the Emperor. Only the High Ministers may see him. But I hear the sounds. A dull thump of the staff, the Sovereign of Heaven appears. The creak of silk, the ministers bow. A single gong strike, the Emperor sits. In that moment, even the birds in the Forbidden City fall silent. Because if the Emperor becomes angry, it's like an earthquake, without warning. Death can come for a loud breath, a shaky voice, or a misplaced comma. I stand in the shadow of a column. I do not breathe. Only my fingers hold the scroll. On it, appointments. A new governor in Shandong. Reduced salt taxes. The transfer of a concubine from one wing to another. It's not just paper. It's the movement of the world. I hold no power, but I am the conduit of power. After the ceremony comes a brief pause. Breakfast is brought. Rice with pickled cucumber and broth from chicken bones. I eat silently, seated on a low bench. Across from me is a young eunuch from Jiangshun. He's afraid. He drops his spoon. I see his hand trembling. I want to say, "Don't be afraid," but I say nothing. Such things are not said here. Instead, I nod. Once, he understands. And in that moment, for the first time since my arrival, I feel something inside me begin to warm. Small, like a coal, but it's there. And I think, maybe even a shadow, can cast light. You probably think the Forbidden City is a fairy tale, that it's made of gold, jade, and moonlight. That inside, there are soft carpets, silk-clad boughs, and sweet clouds of incense. And you're not entirely wrong. All of that exists. All of it is true. But there's another truth. One we eunuchs speak only through glances, and whisper only to those who can no longer repeat it. The Forbidden City is beautiful, but its beauty is not meant to be admired. It is meant to command. You walk through a hall painted with dragons, and every whisker is perfect measured, curled just right. But you know, if your footsteps echo louder than they should, you've offended the dragon. If you walk along the wrong line in the mosaic, you've offended the order. If your gaze lingers on a concubine more than 3 breaths, you've offended harmony itself. And for that, you may die. Not right away. Not always with screams. Sometimes death comes in the form of reassignment to a cold wing. Sometimes in a letter never answered. Sometimes it's just a phrase. You are not needed today. The most terrifying part of this place is that even death arrives politely. The first time I witnessed, it was 3 months after my assignment. It was a cold evening. We were counting scrolls in the archive when suddenly a gong sounded, but not the usual one. 3 distinct strikes. That could mean only one thing. A direct imperial order, not open to question. The senior eunuch left the room, returned a minute later, spoke a name. I knew him, Lian Hu, a skilled calligrapher. He worked in the quilt halls, always joking. He didn't look afraid when he heard his name. He just exhaled like something inside him had finally let go. They took him away. The next morning, his name was gone from the records. His room was empty. His robe returned. His cup removed. As if he had never existed. No one told us why. That was normal. In the Forbidden City, explanations are a luxury. But I knew. We all knew. He had passed a note to one of the concubines. And she was pregnant. No one asked who the father was. In this palace, when a woman is pregnant and the father is unknown, they punish the one who saw, but said nothing. Lian Hu must have just looked away, and that was enough. Since then, I've understood. The gold on the columns, it isn't decoration. It's a mask. Beneath it lie tears, conspiracies, and torture. I've heard the concubines moaning at night, not from pain, but from loneliness. I've heard young eunuchs cry when they thought no one was listening. I've heard the old ones speak to spirits, because spirits do not betray. I've learned to stay silent, not just with my mouth, but with my face, my body, and my heart. I've learned to bow even when no one is watching, to smile even when I hear someone being taken away for the last time. It was necessary. It was survival. One day, an old eunuch named Min came up to me. He had silver hair, a bent spine, and eyes like cracks in porcelain. He placed his hand on my shoulder, a rare gesture among us, since we don't often touch. He said, "When you are like me, you will remember only the silence." And he walked away. I didn't understand what he meant. Not then, but now I do. In the end, in this palace, only silence remains. Either you dissolve into it, or it dissolves into you. Not ceremonial, not imperial, but real, raw, human noise. The clang of metal, the foreman's shouts, the rattle of stretchers, the sighs of laborers. It wasn't a palace. It was a construction site. When I first stepped through the gate of divine prowess, the Forbidden City was not yet finished. Half the roofs were still bare. The tiles were yellow, but not yet fully laid. The paint on the beams was fresh, reeking of lacquer so sharp it stung the eyes. The stone lions had no eyes yet. According to belief, their pupils are carved last. Otherwise, they might begin to see too soon. And then came December, 1420, officially the 18th year of Emperor Yongel's reign. Unofficially, the last day anyone dared doubt the greatness of the empire's new heart. The construction had taken 14 years. From 1406, when Yongle ordered the capital moved from Nanjing to Beijing, until this date, when the palace stood ready to receive eternity. Over 1 million laborers, more than 100,000 architects, craftsmen, eunuchs, and haulers. Stone was brought in winter across frozen rivers. It was easier that way. Walls were raised in summer in heat and dust, beneath the gong beats of commanders. Every brick, every beam wasn't just material. It was a sacrifice. People died from cold, from falls, from hunger, from exhaustion. And all of it, for what? For a symbol. Yongle didn't just want a palace. He wanted a celestial model of the universe, where every hall was a planet, every corridor a path of stars, every step a movement of the sun. And at last, in December, that world was completed. I stood among the other eunuchs as they brought in the final stone. It was white marble, carved in the shape of a dragon's claw. It was destined for the upper step of the Hall of Supreme Harmony. 3 master craftsmen carried it on a cloth of crimson. Their faces were smeared with ashes, sign of humility before heaven. They said nothing. Everything was silent, even the birds. Somewhere in the shadows, the imperial astronomers stood, checking. Was this truly the right day? According to the stars, the wind, the emperor's breath. When the stone was set into place, Yongle appeared, accompanied by 12 bodyguards. He wore a golden robe embroidered with 9 dragons. He did not smile. He looked forward, as if seeing not steps, but centuries. And he said, "Heaven is complete. Let there be order beneath it." We fell to the ground, and for the first time I felt a tear touch the floor. Not from pain, but from magnitude. I was no one, but I was a witness. That evening, the entire palace was bathed in light. Thousands of oil lamps, hundreds of incense burners. The music soft and slow, like a river in fog. The concubines danced across marble tiles. The officials drank like reform would never come. We eunuchs celebrated too, quietly, in our own wing. They allowed us rice with duck and a small cup of wine. That was a lot. An incredible lot. The senior eunuch raised a toast. Now we are not just men. We are spirits of the Forbidden City. And I realized, for the first time since the day of my castration, I felt a sense of belonging. I was part of something vast, even if not by name, even if I would leave no descendants, even if history would forget my face. I was there when they laid the final stone. Until that day, Yongle was never the owner of the Forbidden City, only its creator. He built it from afar, commanded from Nanjing, issued decrees, sent blueprints, but he never set foot here himself. We all awaited him like people wait for the sun on a winter morning, with fear, with awe, with aching necks from constant bowing. The emperor's arrival is not a journey. It is the movement of the world. You don't merely cross a country. You shift the axis of the celestial realm. The stars observe the procession. Monks pray over it. Soldiers guard it. Officials escort it. And heaven itself comments, through winds, through clouds, through the cries of birds. I was one of 100 eunuchs assigned to greet the emperor at the southern gate. They gave us new robes colored, like fallen lotus petals, and leather belts with bronze clasps. We rehearsed our bows 72 times a day until our knees began trembling of their own accord. When word came that the imperial convoy had left Beijing, the entire palace held its breath. We were forbidden to speak louder than a whisper. Every speck of dust in the Hall of Supreme Unity was swept 3 times. Even the sparrows were driven away with drums, so they wouldn't pollute the symbolic purity of the moment. The emperor arrived in early spring of 1421. Almost a year had passed since the palace was completed, but he had waited, consulted the priests, watched the signs. They say that on the day of his arrival, the sun rose perfectly aligned with the central gate. We all saw it, or wanted to believe we did. Yongle entered the city in a palanquin, adorned with golden tassels and blue silk. Ahead of him walked 108 mandarins officials in red and blue hats, holding plaques of merit. Behind them came war elephants adorned with bells. Then musicians, priests, astrologers. But when he appeared, Everyone outside the gates fell to their knees. Everyone except one young laundry girl who didn't realize the palanquin was already so close. She looked directly. She was never seen again, but everyone remembered. Yongle ascended the central steps of the Hall of Supreme Harmony slowly, as if the stairs themselves had to adjust to him. He did not turn. He did not smile. He did not speak. But when he entered, the throne behind him gleamed, as if yellow jade had caught the sun's first light. And in that moment, we all knew. He had accepted the palace, and the palace had accepted him. With the emperor's move came change. The archives were rushed in from Nanjing. Officials lost their posts. New ministers appeared, as if conjured from air. Then came the purge. Those who supported the heirs of the previous emperor disappeared. Eunuchs appointed under Hongwu retired, which almost always meant death. The Forbidden City had been built in the name of harmony. But in essence, it was a monument to power, to its final consolidation. Yongle was now entrenched, and we all knew it. Every whispering maid, every stooped archivist, every boy brought north from the southern provinces, we all knew he was no longer just an emperor. He had become the center of heaven and earth, and we were his shadow. If you want to understand what power means in the Celestial Empire, don't look at the throne. Look at the duty roster. When the capital moved to Beijing, Emperor Yongle wanted to ensure that his palace was not only beautiful, but obedient. That every official, every concubine, every cook, every eunuch was recorded, defined, fixed in place. He did not like emptiness. Not in architecture, not in documents. So he ordered a census of all who served within the palace and summoned the Great Council of Administration. Nothing like it had ever occurred in the history of the Ming Dynasty. The council lasted 7 days, each day from morning until late into the night. The meetings were held in the Hall of Essential Harmony. I had no right to enter, but I was assigned to deliver documents and record every entrant, which meant I saw them all. The Minister of Rights, with ink stains on his sleeve, always rushing, always scribbling. The Minister of Punishments, whose eyes looked carved into bone. He never blinked. The Chief Astrologer, who smelled perpetually of garlic and roses. And of course the eunuchs, so many eunuchs. Some of them held more power than ministers. People feared them, envied them, and they smiled. At the council, everything was discussed. Who earns how much? Who is allowed access to which halls? Who has the right to see the emperor once a month? And who shall never again leave the outer court? Each decision was written on yellow scrolls, and the imperial seal was pressed with 3 fingers firmly. I saw the hand of one secretary tremble when he was reassigned from the southern wing to the northern one. Just a transfer, it seemed. But we all knew the northern wing had no windows. The most important part of the census was the inventory of people, just like a storeroom. Name, age, province, rank, function, salary. For concubines, separate scrolls. Skin tone, shape of eyebrows, voice, preferred incense, lunar body cycle. For eunuch's position and degree of trust, there were scales. Real ones, from mute servant to trusted ear. Those ranked above level 5 were written in red ink. Those below in black, as dark as soot. I was listed at level 3. Internal administrative access, support staff, which meant I could touch internal documents, but had no right to think about them. I signed my name like this. A shadow that sees, but does not know. By the end of the 7th day, the lists were sealed into chests and carried to the Jade Tower. There beneath fireproof stone was the inner archive, where no one had access, except the Emperor's personal archivist. He was already old, white-haired, barely able to walk, but they carried him as a sign of ancient authority. They said that in his youth, he had once saved a favored concubine from false accusation, proving that a letter she was said to have written was forged. For that, he wasn't given gold. He was given time, the chance to live peacefully under 3 emperors. When he took the chests, he said, "Now the emperor knows what he holds in his mouth." I shuddered when I heard it, but he was right. To Yongle, we were not people. We were flavor, texture, temperature of power. He needed to know what his tongue rested on before he dared say, execute, or reward. The Forbidden City took years to build, its walls sturdy, its roof soaring, its dragons symmetrical. But its true test was not architectural. It came with the first execution. Only when blood is spilled inside the palace can it be considered consecrated. That's what the old builders said as they laid the final brick. That's what everyone who served in the shadow of the throne believed. And then the day came, when the air first smelled not of incense, but of fear. It was spring, not long after the great census. Yongle was now firmly established in Beijing. The astrologers had confirmed heaven's approval, and the emperor began to clear the remnants. He had not forgotten those who failed to support him when he usurped the throne from his nephew in 1402. Many of those men had faded into the background, still serving, still bowing, still smiling. But the emperor remembered. And now, seated in the heart of the empire, surrounded by walls and loyal eunuchs, he decided the time had come. The first were 3 ministers from the old court, the Minister of Agriculture, the Minister of Rights, and the former imperial tutor. They were summoned in the morning. No warning, no charges, no witnesses. I happened to be passing the hall of focused reflection when I saw them being led away. Not bound, not in chains, politely, one by one, accompanied with respect, their robes clean, their faces calm, but their eyes were already saying goodbye to this world. 3 hours later, their names were erased from the palace registers. That evening, whispers spread through the court. They had been executed within the walls, never taken beyond the palace. That was the signal, a sign for all of us. The Forbidden City was not just a jewel of power. It was now a weapon of fear. The next executions were louder. They touched provincial governors suspected of ties to the former emperor's bloodline. Some were summoned to Beijing. Some simply stopped receiving responses to their reports. And once, I myself copied a decree that read, ... remove his name from all state records, erase his seals, bury the body without ceremony, and speak of him no more. I wrote those words by hand, and at one point realized my heart was trembling along with the brush. We were not afraid of death. We were afraid of erasure. In the palace, no one died screaming. No one pleaded. But all disappeared, quickly, precisely, without a trace. One night, the senior eunuch Li Beozhong gathered us all in the archive. Without ceremony, he lit a single candle and said, "Those you knew are gone. Now begins a new shadow. Whoever wishes to remain must learn to be invisible." And I understood. The Forbidden City had come alive. It was no longer merely a place. It was an organism with fangs, with eyes, with memory. And its first killing was its first breath. Who really rules the harem? From the outside, the harem is quiet, a sweet mist of incense and silence. But inside, it's a miniature palace without men, where the fight for power isn't over a throne, but over a glance. Not over documents, but over a night beside the emperor, and everything that might be born from that night. I was reassigned to the inner court in autumn. After one of the eunuchs suddenly fell ill. It happens, especially to those who hear too much. The women's section of the palace was known as visible to heaven, but hidden from earth. Concubines, imperial wives, maids, attendants, they all lived there, in pavilions painted in soft tones, with cedar chests in the corners filled with medicines and silk scrolls. It seemed refined, but I knew behind every fan was a scheme. Behind every smile either a tear, poison, or a petition. In this part of the palace, the empress didn't rule, nor did the senior consorts. The one who ruled was Guangong, the chief overseer. I didn't even say her name in my mind. They warned us, if you speak her name aloud, she'll feel it. She was not beautiful, not young, but people feared her more than the ministers, because she knew everything. Who spoke to whom, who gave which hairpin to whom, who slipped what herb into whose tea. She spoke softly, but when she placed a period at the end of a report, that period could be the end of a life. In the harem, there were no accidents. Every movement was scheduled. Every appearance at the morning check-in was a performance. Ladies-in-waiting escorted the concubines to the baths, and everything from the water temperature to the scent of the petals was calculated for one purpose, to impress the emperor if he happened to walk in. The emperor came rarely, but his attention was like the favor of the gods. And so each concubine prepared herself as if she were about to enter legend, even if, in her entire life, he would never once look her way. Once, I was assigned to prepare the quarters of a concubine named Lunjing. She was from Suzhou. They said her voice was like a flute. When she walked past, the entire corridor seemed to go quiet. She wore a robe the color of ink, and her hair was styled the way only monasteries teach. 3 days later, she was transferred to a distant wing. No reason given. Whispers said. She smiled at the wrong eunuch. I don't know if that eunuch was me. At night, when the pavilion doors closed, everything seemed still, but only on the outside. Inside, a quiet war was always being waged. Servants passed notes. Young concubines sent each other gifts, tea with lily, handkerchiefs, hairpins, and sometimes messages. Someone somewhere didn't wake up. Someone disappeared, and no one asked. Everyone learned to stay silent. I stayed silent too. I became like a shadow between pavilions. I knew which room held elixirs, where forbidden books were kept, and who knew how to forge the imperial seal ink. But I never betrayed anyone, because I understood. In this world, no one is safe. Even those who can never be fathers can still be accused. In the palace, children are not a joy. They are a threat. An illegitimate child is a spark near a barrel of gunpowder, especially if born within the harem, where every whisper can become a weapon and every glance an accusation. I had been a eunuch in the Forbidden City for several years when I first heard a name spoken in a whisper. Not a noble name, not a concubine's, the name of an infant. And that was more terrifying than hearing the name of someone condemned, because in the harem, babies are not meant to exist. Officially, only the empress, or a senior concubine with ancestral approval, alongside astrologers, high eunuchs, and court archivists, could bear the emperor's child. But the emperor was human, and the harem hundreds of women, young, educated, hand-picked from across the empire, to serve, to wait, to hope. And yes, sometimes, more was conceived than expected. These incidents were never recorded in the chronicles, but we eunuchs, we knew. Sometimes certain herbs ran out too quickly in the apothecary. Sometimes in the middle of the night, someone would bring a cloth stained with blood and ask, trembling like a candle in wind, "Is it that?" Sometimes it was already too late. The story I'm about to share, I have never spoken aloud. It is not written. It lives only within me. Once, I was assigned to a pavilion of mid-ranking handmaidens. My tasks were simple. Keep the rooms clean, deliver messages, meet messengers. One of the concubines, young from the province of Fujian, had a soft voice and a faint beauty mark near her temple. She rarely spoke, but played the chin like a poet of silence. Her music felt as if she knew she was being watched, not by the emperor, but by time itself. After some months, she began to change. She went out less, ate less, sat quietly by the wall, hands resting over her stomach. I knew, we all knew, but no one spoke. When her condition became undeniable, a junior overseer came to her. Not the chief. This one was ambitious, eager for rank. She entered the room wordlessly, looked around, approached the girl, and handed her a wooden tablet with just one character written on it. Eliminate. That night, there were no screams, no cries, just silence. By morning, the pavilion was sealed. The girl was gone, and her music was never heard again. They said the child had been born, but no one knew boy or girl. No one knew if it lived. Only an old gardener, bent with age, noticed a new peony bush the next day, planted in the empty patch by the back wall of the courtyard. Since then, every year, on the day of the spring equinox, the peony blooms first. And every year, I pass by it, slowly, with a slight bow. That story became my greatest lesson in silence. In the palace, you survive only if you know when not to look, when not to hear, when not to ask. Because in the Forbidden City, there are children who can be seen, and children who are remembered only by shadows. No one screams from pain in the palace here. They don't slash, they don't behead, they don't shout. If they want to kill you, they do it in a teapot. Poison is a style, a politic, a language spoken by those who cannot speak aloud. When I first began my service in the pavilion of concubines, I was taught not just how to serve tea. I was taught to watch hands, smell the air, listen to how liquid pours into porcelain. Because one drop, and it's over. You're gone, and no one knows why. Every morning in the palace begins with a tea ceremony. For concubines, jasmine or lotus tea. For senior eunuchs, strong pu'er. For the empress, a special infusion of bark and saffron. Each type of tea had its own temperature, its own cup, its own ritual. But that was only the surface. In truth, tea was the most elegant method to remove someone quietly. No one questions you if a concubine suddenly faints, if a eunuch succumbs to the heat, if a senior handmaid was just too sensitive to pollen. Everyone nods. Everyone pretends to believe. And you just change the tray. There's one case I remember more than all the rest. A concubine named Zhao Ying, beautiful, proud, intelligent. Rumor said the emperor spent 3 nights in a row with her. That alone was nearly a title. But she was too capable. She played the pipa. She could recite classical poetry. She knew how to influence maids and attendants. And she wrote. Yes, she wrote poems, which were passed hand to hand through eunuchs. And in those poems there were hints. Political, clever, daring. One summer afternoon, she requested her favorite, green tea with orange peel. But when the cup was placed before her, she smiled and did not touch it. Who changed the water today? She asked. Silence. She nodded, took a sip. The next morning, she was dead in her sleep. Cause of death? Fever and exhaustion. But we knew. The maid who served her tea disappeared that same night. And I remember the smell of that tea to this day. Light, citrusy with just the faintest trace of iron. In the palace, there existed a secret underground catalog of banned substances. We called it the Invisible Inventory. It listed powdered scorpion bone, oil from datura seeds, crushed pearls, juice from unripe loquats. Some worked instantly. Some took weeks. But all of them shared one thing in common. They tasted like silence. The poisoners were rarely rewarded, but they were never punished. And that was reward enough. You might ask, was I afraid? I was, every day. Every cup, every bowl of rice, every sip of water. I learned to drink tea only after the senior eunuch took the second sip. I drank only if his hand didn't shake. I listened to the sound of porcelain placed on a tray. I smelled the tea looking not for fragrance, but for the absence of one, because death in the palace has no taste. It is colorless, like a shadow behind your back. You never know where they come from, but if you don't duck in time, they'll knock you down. You can't see them. You can't catch them. But they decide fates, raise concubines, execute ministers, destroy trust, create legends. You can be flawless and still die if someone whispers your name in the wrong corner. In the palace, a rumor is not a gossip. It's currency. And we, the eunuchs, are often the bankers of that currency. When I first entered the harem, they warned me, don't listen, or listen to everything, but never repeat. I broke that rule once, only once. A young handmaid, beautiful and southern, handed me a handkerchief and whispered, they say concubine Yin is not who she claims to be. I didn't answer. I just nodded. But the next day, another eunuch asked me, have you heard that Yin might be from a Korean bloodline? I said nothing. But the following morning, her rooms were sealed, her name erased, and the handmaid who whispered to me was gone. I understood. They had been testing me. From that day forward, I became a mute space in the flow of rumors. Rumors started from the smallest things. A drop of perfume, a concubine's glance at the court physician, a cough from the emperor, a posture that seemed slightly less straight. Sometimes they were planted on purpose, cast like bait, to see who would bite. One eunuch once told me, late at night, how his colleague was accused of treason, simply because he didn't look surprised when hearing a fake piece of news. If you're not surprised, it means you knew. If you knew, it means you were involved. And if you were involved, you vanish. There were also formal rumors, that's what we called the ones written in documents, but with no signature, no seal, no source. These scrolls appeared in morning briefings, often between the lines. Some have noted that concubine Su frequently misses morning rituals. A growing unease in the harem regarding the increase of maids from Fujian. It is unclear why the third-rank archivist has been replaced twice this month. These were rumors too, just written on parchment, and they were trusted more than official decrees. We all knew, if your name appeared in such a scroll, you were already on the list of those who would soon disappear. It was just a matter of time. I learned to live in the shadow of rumors, to move in ways that didn't create them, but always know where the draft was blowing. I listened, always, but I never shared. Not with anyone, not ever. Even when my fellow eunuchs began to whisper, I pretended not to hear. And then I would go and record it in memory, because rumors are the true history of the palace. Not the one written in the archives, but the one passed from glance to glance. And if you know how to read between the lines, you survive. The arrival of the South Sea envoys, Zheng He. Sometimes the palace becomes too small. Even with 1,000 halls, even with ceilings that reach the sky, even with gardens where flowers bloom in time with the lunar calendar. And so we lean toward the window, not to escape, but to hear news from elsewhere, where the colors are different, the food is strange, the gods have other names. When I first heard that Shenzhen was returning, I didn't believe it. That was the name people gave to Admiral Zheng He's fleet. 7 expeditions to India, Ceylon, Arabia, Africa. It all sounded like a legend, but he was a real man. And like me, a eunuch, word came in spring of 1421. The fleet was returning from the 7th voyage. They said the ships were like floating cities, each one twice as tall and 3 times as long as any junk. Hundreds of sailors, hundreds of officials, hundreds of crates filled with gifts. They're bringing a giraffe, whispered one archivist, and trumpeting elephants, added another, and pearls the size of quail eggs. We laughed, not because we didn't believe, but because we hoped some of it was true. Zheng He himself did not come to Beijing. He was sick, weak, and remained in Nanjing. But his envoys, his diplomats, his escorts. They arrived at the palace with the offerings. I was assigned to the team of eunuchs meeting the caravan at the southern gate. I will never forget that day. They opened crates in front of us, and what lay inside was unlike anything we'd ever seen. Colorful cloths from the Maldives, ivory figurines from Mogadishu, letters from a sultan in Calicut, and yes, a giraffe, tall and spotted, with eyes like those of a sage. The concubines gasped. The officials pretended not to be impressed. And the emperor, he rose from his throne and stepped into the light. That was rare. He approached the giraffe and said, "This is a sign. A creature with no understanding of rank, yet it moves gracefully, with dignity. Let it live in the garden. Let it observe." The giraffe was moved to the imperial menagerie, beside the cranes and peacocks. But its eyes seemed to understand more than we did. Rumors about the gifts spread quickly, especially those given to the Hall of Ancestors. They said there was a golden globe, showing lands not found on Chinese maps. Some ministers were outraged. Why should we care about places that do not pay tribute? But the emperor was in a different mood. He said, "He who does not know what lies beyond the sea does not know where his own power ends." He ordered, "Preserve the gifts, record everything. Never forget the name Zheng." I personally copied one of the inventories. Pearls, 400 agate tablets, 127. Ink sticks with Arabic calligraphy, minus 24 sets. And strangely, a box of dried fruit labeled, "Fruits of the Sacred Tree." I opened it. The scent was tart, like the air after summer rain. Later, I heard that one of the young eunuchs who had served under Zheng, he asked to stay in Beijing. His name was Yang Ming. He said, "I am tired of the sea, but when I stand on the stones of the Forbidden City, I still hear the waves." And I understood him, because even in the heart of the empire, you can still hear the world, if you know where to listen. When the world comes to the palace in the palace, every day is the same. Tea is served at the exact same time. Mats are aligned with perfect precision. The emperor takes one step forward, and his shadow follows him. Exactly. But everything changes when a foreign embassy arrives. That's when even the stiffest officials blow the dust off ancient books to learn how to say, "Welcome," in a language they don't understand. That's when the palace becomes not just the center of the celestial empire, but a stage for the entire world. First came the envoys from Samarkand. Uzbek merchants in warm robes brought chests of lapis lazuli, carpets woven with the scent of steppe winds, and dried fruits still fragrant with sun. One was said to be a distant relative of Timur, and that made some ministers pale. The memory of the great conqueror still lingered in the shadows of our corridors. I served them tea. They bowed politely, but not too low, as if they didn't know that here, even the stones have titles. One of them, young and sharp-eyed, asked me in careful Chinese, "Is it true that none of you can have children?" I looked away. I didn't answer, but I understood. He wasn't mocking. He was astonished. To him, we were the invisible cost of an empire. 2 months later came an embassy from Mecca. Yes, from the holiest land of Islam. They had traveled through India, Bengal, Southeast Asia. They brought textiles with Arabic script, fragrances of frankincense, and a document affirming friendship with the brother of the sea, as they called Zheng He. Their most unique gift was a silver mirror. It didn't reflect like a portrait, but like a symbol, as if it showed not your face, but your destiny. The emperor didn't look into it. He ordered it placed in the hall of things that cannot be explained. I saw my own reflection by accident when I was polishing a tray, and it felt like my eyes were, not mine, as if I were looking at myself from a distance, as if I were one of the envoys, and not a boy from a southern village, turned into a shadow. Last that year came the delegation from Sri Lanka. They arrived late, after their former king refused to submit and had been politely replaced. The new prince came young, frightened, accompanied by dancers, musicians, and elephants. Yes, 2 real elephants, their foreheads painted. They passed through the gates, leaving behind footprints that smelled like the memory of a rainforest. One elephant paused in front of the grand hall, and I swear it bowed. Everyone gasped, even the elders. They called it a sign. Even the beasts sensed the greatness of the empire. Or maybe he simply knew that in this place, silence was safer than sound. Each embassy left behind a scroll with a message. As an archival eunuch, I copied them in 3 versions. One for the Imperial Archive, one for the Ancestral Repository, and one for the Ashen Library, where we kept things meant to fade. Some of the letters were in languages we couldn't even read. But the translator, always frowning, would say, "The words don't matter. What matters is the act of submission." And I understood. A palace doesn't just receive, it absorbs. You can bring anything. Elephants, gold, poetry, a smile. But once you pass through these gates, you are no longer the one who arrived. Over the years, the palace doesn't grow. It just gets heavier. Heavier on the shoulders, in the knees, in the thoughts. You know every turn, every crack in the wall, every teacup with a chipped foot. But still, you walk as if seeing everything for the first time. Because in the Forbidden City, it's not the place that changes. It's you. They no longer let me carry documents. Now I hand out towels. I rebind old scrolls, smooth out papers where the ink has already vanished. I'm old, but that means I survived. 5.2. Temples that no longer speak our names. They used to pray for us in the temples. For the eunuchs. As men who gave up their bodies in service. But not anymore. Now they say we are immoral. That we are rootless. That we serve only ourselves and the staircase to the throne. I've seen the name tablets taken down. The lines in the chronicles crossed out. But I remember. I am the last library where the past still has a voice. 5.3. The emperor is dead, but we're still here one morning. Everything changed. The gong didn't strike at the proper hour. The handmaidens wept in corners, heads bowed. Letters arrived, edged in black. The Yongle emperor was dead, not by assassination, not by plot, by age, by time. And suddenly, everyone realized he was mortal, but we were even more alive, because we remained, still serving tea, still watching the walls, still whispering. Here he stood. Here he looked. Here he said, "Execute. We are witnesses." Shadows cast by a light that has gone out. 5.4. You lean against the wall. And hear me? Maybe you're in Beijing right now. Maybe you're standing beside an old wall in some quiet neighborhood. Maybe you don't even know that this was once a corner of the inner court where I once served tea. Lean in, close your eyes, and maybe you'll hear the creak of a serving tray, the whisper of handmaidens, the faint sound of Qin music at sunset. That's me, Jiangshun, eunuch. I left behind no children, but I left behind a story, not in books, but in walls, in shadows, in the scent of lacquer and jasmine. And if you heard me, then I'm still here. Sleep well. Thank you for listening until the end. If you're still awake, tell me what minute you closed your eyes and what city you're in. Follow me, and tomorrow I'll whisper something else the world has forgotten.